This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one leader, one country, or one bad phone call. This is about a system that was built on an assumption so old, so comfortable, we stopped checking whether it was still true. An assumption that said, when it matters, when things get tight, when the future is on the line, allies will provide. Quietly, reliably, automatically. That assumption just failed. Not loudly, not with tanks or speeches, with a pause, with a single decision that exposed how fragile power really is on this continent. What's dangerous here is not what happened. It's what was revealed, because buried inside this moment is a dependency most people don't know they have. A dependency that touches your electricity, your job, the next generation of technology, and the balance of power for decades to come. If you're still thinking this is someone else's problem, stay with me, because the system you live inside just showed its fault line. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What actually controls this system now is not diplomacy, not treaties, not shared history. It's leverage over inputs. The modern economy no longer runs on speeches or intentions. It runs on a small number of physical things that cannot be substituted, cannot be rushed, and cannot be faked. Energy that never turns off. Materials that take decades to secure. Supply chains that only look stable until the moment they aren't. For a long time, power meant armies and borders. Then it meant oil. Now it means something quieter. Who controls the bottlenecks that everything else depends on? The mistake we keep making is telling this story as a dispute between governments. That's comforting, because governments change. But bottlenecks don't care who's in office. They don't respond to goodwill. They don't recognize loyalty. They respond only to scarcity. And scarcity rewrites relationships faster than ideology ever could. What you're watching here is not a disagreement. It's a reordering of who needs whom and how badly. And the most dangerous shifts are the ones that happen without alarms, because the shift already started long before anyone noticed. For decades, this system worked because it moved slowly, so slowly that it felt permanent. Before, energy planning meant thinking in generations, build once, maintain forever. Assume tomorrow looks like today, just slightly bigger. Before, supply meant abundance. If you needed more, you paid more. If one partner hesitated, another stepped in. And because that was true for so long, it stopped being questioned, but quietly, without announcements or votes, the ground shifted. Industries consolidated, domestic production shrank, extraction moved offshore, processing became centralized, risk was outsourced in the name of efficiency. What looked like progress was actually compression. Fewer suppliers, longer timelines, thinner margins for error. And the most dangerous part? Nothing broke when this happened. Lights stayed on. Markets kept rising. Technology accelerated, which trained everyone, governments, corporations, voters, to believe the system was resilient. It wasn't. It was brittle, held together by assumptions made in a different era. And when systems like that fail, they don't fail all at once. They fail at the edges, in places most people aren't watching, until one small moment reveals how much has already changed. Then the system flinched, not with a crash, with a shock that looked, at first, like an isolated decision. A request was made for something essential, not symbolic, not optional, something the future quite literally runs on. And the answer wasn't delayed. It wasn't negotiated. It wasn't softened. It was immediate. That's why markets noticed before the public did. That's why defense planners started making phone calls. That's why energy analysts stopped using conditional language. Because this wasn't a policy dispute, it was a stress test. And the system failed it cleanly. Suddenly, access was no longer assumed. Price was no longer theoretical. Timelines stopped being flexible. What looked like a single refusal exposed a deeper problem. There was no backup plan, no excess capacity waiting quietly in the background, no friendly substitute ready to step in, no margin, just exposure. And once exposure is visible, it can't be hidden again. Because every other player sees it too. Every competitor, every partner, every market. The shock wasn't the no. The shock was realizing how much depended on never hearing it. Here's the part most people miss. The damage doesn't land where the decision is made. It travels quietly through contracts, through pricing models, through assumptions embedded deep inside planning documents that were never designed for uncertainty. This system works by pushing risk downward. Governments promise growth. Corporations promise delivery. Utilities promise power. And when something breaks, the cost doesn't move upward to the decision makers. It moves outward, into markets, into households, into jobs that disappear without explanation. The people who benefit from this structure are the ones closest to control. They hold the leverage. They can wait. They can renegotiate. Everyone else absorbs the delay. What makes this mechanism dangerous isn't greed or incompetence. It's design. A system optimized for efficiency has no patience for disruption. And a system optimized for growth has no tolerance for scarcity. So when a critical input tightens, the response isn't adaptation. It's acceleration. Prices rise faster than policy can respond. Projects stall before alternatives exist. And pressure builds in places that don't make headlines. By the time the effects are visible, the mechanism is already running on its own. And stopping it is harder than triggering it. Then the tempo changes. Faster, sharper, less forgiving. Plans that assumed years suddenly face weeks. Budgets built on stability start absorbing volatility. Language shifts from growth to exposure. Phones ring. Meetings stack. Contingency plans that were never meant to be used are opened anyway. Not because anyone panicked, but because the math stopped working. When a critical input tightens, everything else speeds up. Procurement races ahead of regulation. Markets move ahead of policy. Expectations outrun reality. And the system doesn't slow down to let anyone catch up. Instead, it demands decisions without certainty. Commitments without guarantees. Investments without clarity. This is how small disruptions turn into structural ones. Because delay is expensive, hesitation is punished. And waiting for perfect information means losing position. So pressure compounds. One adjustment triggers another. One hedge creates a new risk. One workaround exposes a deeper dependency. And somewhere inside all of this, the original problem stops being the problem. The system is now reacting to itself. And once that happens, control becomes an illusion. This is where it stops being abstract. Because the system doesn't experience consequences. You do. You feel it when costs quietly climb and no one can quite explain why. When bills change before wages do. When projects pause. Not with layoffs announced, but with hours cut and plans revisited. You feel it when certainty disappears. When the future you were told to expect starts requiring footnotes. When stability turns conditional. What's unsettling is not just the money, it's the loss of predictability. A system that can't guarantee inputs, can't guarantee outcomes. And when outcomes become uncertain, risk gets passed down to workers, to families, to communities that never agreed to carry it. You didn't vote on this. You weren't consulted, but you're inside it. If this feels distant, that's by design. Systems like this only become visible when they're already reshaping daily life. And once you notice that, you start seeing it everywhere. If you want to understand where this pressure goes next and why it doesn't stay contained, stay with me. Once pressure reaches this level, it doesn't stay local. It never does. Because systems like this are interconnected by default, what tightens in one place forces movement somewhere else. Other countries notice the strain and adjust their own plans. Allies begin hedging quietly. Competitors sense opportunity. Supply that once flowed predictably now moves strategically toward stability, toward leverage, toward whoever offers certainty instead of assumption. And that changes alignments without treaties being rewritten. Energy planning shifts across borders. Investment decisions reroute. Long-term partnerships form not out of loyalty, but necessity. This is how influence migrates, not with declarations, with contracts signed while someone else hesitates. The most destabilizing part is that no one announces this realignment while it's happening. It shows up later in missed opportunities, higher costs, slower growth. By the time it's obvious, it's already locked in. And now the question isn't whether the system can be put back the way it was. It's whether anyone still remembers how. Because once global confidence reroutes, it rarely comes back quickly. And what happens next depends on which direction the system accelerates from here. From here, the system doesn't resolve. It accelerates, and there are only 3 directions it can go. The first is adjustment. Slow, costly, politically uncomfortable. Existing relationships are repaired just enough to restore flow. Concessions are made quietly. New agreements patch over old assumptions. The system survives, but leaner, more cautious, less trusting than before. Stability returns, but it's conditional now. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks outright. Instead, confidence leaks. Projects move elsewhere. Investments shrink. Costs rise in increments, small enough to explain away, large enough to compound. Power doesn't collapse, it diffuses. And over time, the system becomes weaker, not because of one failure, but because no one believes in it fully anymore. The third path is rupture. Fast, disruptive, impossible to manage cleanly. A critical threshold is crossed. Scarcity becomes permanent. Alignments harden. What was once negotiable becomes strategic. And rebuilding takes years, not months. None of these paths announce themselves when they begin. They all look reasonable at first. They all feel manageable until they aren't. The danger isn't choosing the wrong path. The danger is pretending no choice is being made at all. This is where I stop offering certainty. Because systems like this don't fail on a schedule. They fail when enough people realize the old rules no longer apply and act accordingly. What you've been watching isn't a dispute. It's a reveal of how much power depends on things that cannot be improvised. How much stability rests on relationships that only work when respect flows both ways. How much of the future is being built on inputs that were never secured? Nothing has been fixed yet. Nothing has fully broken either, which is the most dangerous moment, because this is when decisions get made quietly behind closed doors, inside spreadsheets, inside assumptions that won't be questioned publicly until it's too late. If you want comfort, this isn't the place. If you want resolution, it isn't here yet. But if you want to understand what's actually shifting beneath the headlines and why it matters before the effects show up in your life, this is the moment to pay attention. Stay with me, because the next move won't come with an announcement. And once it does, it won't be reversible.